see how this goes. Tensions. Really? Okay. Yeah. All right. Phew. Yeah, comma. I remember that our vet for Snickers said that dogs are absolutely crazy about peanut butter, period. No surprise, period. Love, comma, dad. Jessica, comma. It was a recurring one, period. Just click on the link I gave you for last week's meeting, comma, and that should work, period. But just in case. There it is. Yeah, there it is. There you are. Good evening.
Hello.
Lou.
How are you?
I'm surviving. How about you?
Same.
Sheltering in place?
Yeah. Same as, have been doing past couple months.
You finish up this fall, don't you?
Well, I still need to take a look at my schedule. I don't know. I know I've only got 3 classes left. But I guess normally like I could only take them at a certain time, but I don't know if anything has changed now that,
I don't think so.
yeah,
Only
if nothing has changed, then I guess, I don't know. I may not be able to take my classes. I may have to, wait and see when I could take one of my classes, because I know one of my classes I won't be able to take until the spring.
Which one was that?
I forget the name of the class, but it's I think Dr.
Investment?
Polly teaches it.
Oh, okay. That's policy.
Yeah,
Management
policy management.
6572. And
But I can't take it until the semester that I'm graduating.
yeah, you can. They've changed the rules on that class over a year ago. You can take it at the start, middle, or end of your program.
Oh, well,
And I think it's offered this fall, I think.
well, like I said, I'll need to, I haven't really sat down and I haven't even registered yet. So I haven't.
Check your emails from me. I think I sent you one where I mapped out when you could take those last 3 classes. And
Okay, you probably did. Like I said, I haven't sat down and looked or anything. So much has, changed and over the past couple months, and
no.
but I'll definitely need to. I don't even know when the next term starts. Do you know?
Well, there's summer term, and then no, I don't, because I don't teach in the summer, and most MBAs, there's only 2 courses in the finance MBA curriculum that's offered in the summer. The law, ethics, faith class, GBU 6552 that Dr. Perkins teaches, and global management, which is taught by Sarah.
Yeah, I took one with Dr. Kimmel. Yeah.
But a lot of our MBAs are working for companies that will pay for fall and spring tuition, but not summer. So we have a lot of students that skip the summer and just, stretch out their degree. But look at your email, and then if you have questions, respond. Speaking of that, as I mentioned last week, I don't have a script for tonight. I don't have an agenda. I'm ready
Um,
to answer any questions, work any problems you would like.
well, really, I know I watched last week's Zoom meeting, and I know you kind of answered her question and kind of how the final exam was structured.
Yeah,
Sort of,
I
but
did.
just to, I guess, kind of
It's,
review over that again. And
yeah,
I did have one question. You kind of went over just the pension chapter. I know there will be like problems on the defined benefits and the defined contribution
I noted.
problems, but there's not going to be any problems on the other two.
There'll be no problems on the cash balance plan or the profit sharing plan because there are no problems in the slides. And for
Yeah,
that,
and I noticed that, and I was just making sure because there
yeah,
was information on both of those, kind of, sort of.
to let you know they exist and an idea of how they work.
Yeah, and I was just making sure because I was like,
No, the
there was
problem
something in there that said there may be questions, and I was just like,
questions,
so
yeah,
will there or won't there?
questions would have been had I put questions on the exam. I didn't. It's all problems in one spreadsheet. And unlike the midterm, where there were a bunch of problems worth 10 points each, we covered 3 bigger chapters.
Right.
And so some of the problems are 20 points each. There are problems worth 10 points. I think 1 or 2 worth 15, and some worth 20. Just big problems, very much like the midterm, where you work the problem, take a picture of it with your camera, send it in. And there's one spreadsheet problem, and this time it's only worth 5 points.
And how do we access the spreadsheet? Like, will we, because I know we,
You're not going to actually access the spreadsheet. I took a picture of a spreadsheet that showed the row and column headings,
okay, so it'll already be in Moodle?
just like the midterm. Yeah. You'll
Okay.
look at the spreadsheet and I'll say in spreadsheet cell, G20, what Excel formula would you put in there to accomplish the desired end? And all you do is, give me a formula. You'll have equals B20 times, an Excel formula. It's
Like we just
exactly
type
what
in
you do.
whatever we want like we type in whatever our answer, like the
You don't
formula
type
is.
You don't type it. You handwrite it on a sheet of paper,
Mm.
just like the other problems. Take a picture of it, send it to me. You don't enter anything in the problems in Moodle, in the exam. You use the exam simply to be able to see what the problems are. In fact, it's exactly like you've been doing your weekly quizzes, case quizzes, only these aren't cases. These are just generic problems, much like the problems in your slides. For example, oops, here we go. Here's some slides on derivatives, which was the middle chapter that we looked at. And for instance, here was a problem. Alpo, involving hedging interest rate risk with futures contracts. And I asked you to calculate the implied yield on the bonds. How much would the bond futures prices change if yields went up by 0.4%? Actually, a better example of that might be the one we worked in class. You were given a problem for some company. There we go. Shant Corporation was going to sell a bond issue in 3 weeks after it gets SEC approval. And you were asked to take a position in Treasury bond futures to hedge against the change in interest rates. If interest rates or bond yields go up, the corporate bond issue would go down in value. So you wanted to go short in Treasury bond futures so that if yields go up and you incur a loss on the corporate bonds from your short position on Treasury bond futures, you make an offsetting profit. The trick was how many futures contracts to enter so that what you make on the futures contract almost exactly offsets what you would lose on your corporate bonds. You know, if yields go up, bond values drop. So if yields went up, you could lose money on the corporate bond issue. So we take a short position in Treasury bond futures so that if yields go up, Treasury bond futures values fall, and from your short position, you make a profit. And we had to go through several steps. First, taking the quote, sorry for all the jumping around. First, taking the quote on the Treasury bond futures, which was, you know, that's really 86 and 16/32% of $100,000, which is face value of a T-bond contract, or $86,500. You were asked to find first the implied yield on those T-bond futures, and then test it. For instance, if yields went up a certain amount, how much would the Treasury bond futures contracts fall? And since you're short in the contracts, actually how much they fall would be profit per contract. But we had a big formula we plug into, and one of the things we needed was the percentage change in the value of the futures contracts. Then in this problem, we also looked at how much the corporate bonds would fall, but I threw a curveball in this problem. I said that the corporate bonds were 20% more volatile. So if the change in yields, let me get this off of here. If the change in yields on futures contracts, if they went up 1%, then since the corporate yields are 20% more volatile than the yields on the corporates, would go up 1.2 times that, or 1.2%. And they had a coupon rate of 11%. Selling at face value, that meant that was also their original yield. So if they went up 1.2%, you could figure out the new value of the Shant bonds and how much you'd lose per bond. And that percentage change in the value of the bonds. I'm going through this rather quickly because we did this before. And you were there the night I did this. And then we had this final formula we plugged everything into. The percent change in the corporates, which was 9.5%, the percent change in the T-bond futures, which was 8.5%. Well, I'm writing it out. Actually, there you go. Then the corporate issue was 50 million. And the value of each futures contract was 86.5. And we figured out from that we need to take a short position in 646 futures contracts. And then we back tested it just for grins. That what if treasury yields increased by 50 basis points, corporates increased by 20% more than that, 60 basis points. What would we gain on our futures contracts? On 646 contracts, this was their value before the change. This was the value of the futures contracts after. And because we had a short position, the drop was our profit. It worked out to around 2.5 mil. If that's on the futures, our short position on the futures. On the corporates, if the yields went up to 11.6, that is 60 basis points, then the corporates would drop by about $50 on 50,000 bonds, and that was I forget the total amount. It was whatever it was, about $1,000 per bond to get the number of bonds. What was it? It was
50 million.
50 million. There you go. Then we're looking at 50,000 bonds. And on each of those bonds, we'd have lost around $50. And we'd have lost right at 2.5 mil. So the hedge worked. The gain on our short position in futures contracts approximately offset the loss on our corporate bonds. I don't even remember why I pulled up this chapter. I think it was the first, but you were asking me. And it's problems like these. In this chapter on hedging, we had commodities hedging. I didn't cover that in the Zoom meetings. Remember, in the Zoom meetings, I would only cover a specific main hard topic, usually what the case was about. But you're responsible for the whole set of notes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you went through the YouTube lecture slides, and if you went through the slides, which should have been very similar, there were problems on hedging gains and losses on commodities like gold and corn and so on. There were problems on risk management, interest rate risk of this sort. There were also some problems involving interest rate swap contracts.
Yeah, those are pretty tricky.
They are tricky. In my opinion, that's the trickiest thing we cover. And yet, if you map it out, not so tricky. And then I think I had some problems on floors and caps. If you borrow money on a variable rate, maybe your interest rate is tied to the LIBOR. What you worry about is the LIBOR going through the roof. So you can buy what's called a cap. And a cap's like an insurance policy. It limits the most that you have to pay in interest on the variable rate note. In this particular case, your variable rate was LIBOR plus 2%, and you bought an insurance policy, a one-year cap, that basically guaranteed you would not have to pay more than 8%. This 5,000 didn't even figure in to our calculations. Like any insurance policy, there's a premium you pay. It's not free. But what we did look at was what happens if that variable rate goes up or down. If the interest rate is 4%, if the LIBOR is 4, then the rate that you pay, which was the LIBOR plus 2, that would only be 6%. That's still below the cap. So the cap pays nothing. But if the LIBOR were 7, the rate you'd be paying the bank would be the LIBOR plus 2 or 9. And the most you would have to pay would be 8%, which is that much per month. And the cap would pay the rest. Usually how that would work is you would pay the bank the full amount of interest due, but then the cap would pay you this difference so that the net amount you pay really amounts to 8%. And just like there are caps, there's also something called a floor. If you invest in a variable rate note, maybe you invest in a rate that pays the LIBOR plus 1%. What you're worried about is the LIBOR going down, which would give you a low interest income. So you can buy a floor. In this case, a floor is an insurance contract that guarantees a minimum return. And again, we don't even use the cost of the policy in there. So what you'd receive would be the LIBOR plus 1%. If the LIBOR was 4, then you'd receive 5%, and that's above your floor. So the floor wouldn't kick in. If the LIBOR were, what, 2, you'd get 2 plus 1, that would be 3%. And what you'd receive on the note would be 1 month of interest on whatever the notional principal was, 1 million. You'd get $2,500 on the note, but your minimum amount that you've guaranteed through the floor is 4%. Which would be 3,333. So the cap would make up the difference, that other 833. Pardon me, the floor. The floor would pay you enough that you get that minimum of 4%. If the LIBOR were 3, then you'd be receiving 1 plus the LIBOR, or 4. You'd be getting exactly the minimum, so the floor wouldn't pay you anything. I'm not trying to lead you through what you need to know. I was just arbitrarily trying to show you these are the kinds of problems you get had on the exam. Anything in the slides that's in problem form is fair game. And obviously these were big chapters.
Yeah.
Which is why we only covered 1 a week. Whereas before the midterm, we were covering, what, 2 a week or so.
Right.
Jessica.
Sir.
As you look through these slides, if you get to a problem where you can't quite figure it out, try to work it out on a blank sheet of paper. Where is what I'm looking for? There we go. Just try to work it out. You know, the cap is so many percent for a month times, anyway, yada, yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get stuck, take a picture of that and send it to me. And that
Okay.
way I can counterpunch. I can write on this and say, whoops, up here you made one mistake. That should have been something else. And try
All
to,
right.
rather than rushing you through these slides tonight, I'll check my email 2 or 3 times a day.
Okay. And when do we need to register for the exam in order to not have to pay?
Theoretically, you're supposed to do it 72 hours before the exam. And your exam is scheduled, your exam window, Saturday morning from 6 a.m. to midnight Sunday night. It's a 3-hour exam. You don't want to register later than 9 o'clock Sunday night if you want to be sure and have the full 3 hours. In fact, I wouldn't register later than 8.
You mean you don't want to take it? Are you talking about like taking the exam? Like for the time that to register?
Yeah, look, I would not register for the, pardon me, I'm sorry. You can go ahead and register for the exam tonight, but when you do it, you have to pick a time to start the exam.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. I was just making sure I was understanding.
I wouldn't pick it later than 8 o'clock Sunday night, and the reason is,
You have to have 3 hours.
proctor you before, they vet you first. You show them 2 IDs, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah,
That might take, in the
30
past,
minutes or
take
more.
up to 30 minutes. With the way they're overworked now, it could take up to an hour.
I got you. Alrighty, well, if I have any more questions, I will email you and ask you,
That's a great idea.
but I appreciate you and your help.
Well, tonight it wasn't much help, but
How many, I know we're allowed to have like a formula sheet. How many pages can that be?
what I put for the proctor was 2 sheets of paper, front and back, with prepared notes. And then, of course, you'll need a bunch of blank sheets,
Okay.
because you'll work each problem on a separate sheet of paper, take a picture of it, and then when you email it in, use your name. Well, you don't have to have caps, for just Jessica Thornton, problem 1 or problem 6 or whatever. And your camera in your phone automatically makes that a JPG file, a JPEG file.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Stay
Thank
with
you
it.
so much.
You're doing a lot better than you think. And you've been nailing those weekly quizzes, which is good.
Yeah, I've been trying. I know it doesn't seem like that much time. I prefer, especially now with how everything is, I definitely prefer, in-person interaction more than, virtual interaction, but
I understand. That's one of the reasons I have the Zoom sessions.
But I guess if we have to Zoom, we have to Zoom.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You'd rather be in a classroom, brick and mortar.
Yeah, I know most of the program is online too, and
I think you're going to have brick and mortar classes. The plan, from what I can tell, unless they change their minds, is to go ahead and have regular class meetings this fall for whatever classes you might have had that are hybrid. The
well,
online
I think
classes,
most of the class meetings are hybrid. Yeah, are hybrid or online. That's
yeah,
how most of the program's been for me anyway. I've had a few classes that have been in class, but
those
not a
would be the
lot.
hybrid ones.
Mhm.
The
But
hybrid classes are viewed as being 50% online, so they have one meeting a week face to face.
yeah, I feel like I learn more effectively in class. But anyway, I don't know. I feel like I work harder if I teach my teach myself the material. I don't
I
know.
got it. I got it.
Anyway, well, thank you so much, and I'll email you, and if I have any questions,
Do, please.
and
And I'll try to explain it as well as I can.
yeah, no, you've been a tremendous help. So thank you so
Oh, I
much.
wouldn't overstate things, but okay. All
Thank you so
righty. Well, you have a good week, and
yeah,
I will
you too.
see you. Well, I won't see you. Well, I will. You don't know this, but we get to look at you when you're doing a Proctor U exam.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sort of. It's funny. Okay. You
Well,
take
I'll
care.
talk to you later.
All righty. Bye bye.
All right, bye.